In the jasmine-scented tea shop, James's mother rose halfway from her chair, eyes wet, hands shaking, and then the man with the too wide newspaper stood too. His expensive watch flashed as he lifted his phone, calm as a judge. "Mr. James," he murmured, like this meeting belonged to someone else. James's fingers clamped around mine, not in fear, recognition. Across the room, his mother's mouth formed a silent warning. He's watching. And in that heartbeat, I realized we weren't here to reunite. We were here to be controlled. If you believe a mother's love should never be bargained for, tap like. Your support tells every frightened woman she isn't alone. To understand why a newspaper became a weapon, we must return to the night the painting stayed on our table. That night, the painting didn't leave our table. James didn't hang it. He didn't hide it again. He sat with both palms on the wood, staring at the colors like they were a door he was afraid to open. The house was quiet. Anna slept with her notebook beside her pillow, knee curled on the mattress, breathing slow and trusting. I set a cup of tea near James's hand. He didn't touch it. His jaw tightened once, like he was crushing words before they could rise. I leaned forward, gentle but steady. "Tell me what you're thinking," I whispered. "Not the strong version, the real one." He looked up. His eyes were calm but wet at the edges. "My father is going to turn everything into a document," he said. "A deal, a reasonable arrangement. He'll talk about responsibility like love is a payment plan." He glanced back at the painting. "And my mother? She's been living inside that world with no exit." The way he said my mother was soft, almost ashamed, as if naming her was dangerous. I covered his hand with mine. "And then you don't walk into it alone," I said. "And she doesn't stay alone either. That's why I need to meet her first," he murmured. "Without him. I need her voice, her truth, before he shapes the air around her." I nodded. Then I said what I'd been holding in my chest all day. "James, I want to go with you." "No." It came fast. Pure protection. "Diep, if my father sees you there, if he realizes how much you matter..." "He already knows," I cut in quietly. "He's been circling our gate. You tried to protect me with silence before, and it hurt. I won't live that way again. If we're building a future, I'm part of it." His breath left him slow. "I'm not ashamed of you," he said, voice rough. "I'm afraid for you." "Then we choose the safest version of together," I answered. "Not the loneliest version of safe." He sat with that, then nodded once. "Okay," he whispered. "But we do it smart." Luan arrived like he'd been sent. He saw the painting, saw James's face, and the jokes didn't come. "Your father's in town," he said, "and your mother is the key." James nodded. "I need her before I face him." "Then we plan it," Luan said. "Witnesses, timing, a way out." Officer Thu joined us soon after, calm as a man who understood what control looks like when it wears a suit. James kept it short. Facts, not fury. Officer Thu nodded. "Public place, daytime, 2 entrances, no signing, no private car ride. If your father's people appear, you leave." James's jaw flexed. "If they follow my mother, then we document that too," Officer Thu said. "Control hates witnesses." My eyes went to James's phone. "We contact her first," I said. His hand hovered over the screen like it might burn him. Then he pressed call. The ring sounded too loud in our kitchen. When she answered, her voice was small and trembling. "James," she whispered, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to say his name. His face shifted, hardness melting. "It's me," he said. "I'm here. I need to see you." A pause, then, "You shouldn't. He's here." "I know," James said. "That's why I'm calling you first. Not him." Silence. Then the truth, like a bruise pressed. "He watches," she breathed. "Even when he isn't in the room, he watches." James closed his eyes for half a second. "Then we meet somewhere safe," he said. "A place you choose, a place with people." Her voice broke. "You have children?" "Yes," James said. "And I have Diep. She's with me." On the other end, a small sound, half sob, half relief. "Bring her," James's mother whispered. "Please. I want to meet the woman who kept you human." James swallowed hard. "Tomorrow," he said quickly. "A tea shop near the clinic. 11. "I'll come," she whispered. If I can." When the call ended, James stared at the phone like he'd just stepped onto new ground. He turned to me. "She said bring you." "Then we go," I said, prepared. We kept the children safe and the plan simple. Anna with a trusted neighbor, Nai with familiar arms, Luan close by, not obvious. Officer Thu near enough to see, far enough not to scare James's mother. And the painting. James wrapped it again, not to hide it, to protect it. "Later," he told me, "when I'm ready to face my father with it." After Luan and Officer Thu left, James and I sat at the table again. "If my father offers money," James murmured. "If he offers to solve things." "I don't sell my peace," I said. His eyes searched mine. "And if he threatens, then we leave," I answered. "We protect the kids. We write everything down." Then I softened. "But James, what do you want? Closure or freedom?" He stared at the wood, as if it held old years like stains. "I want my mother to stop apologizing for surviving," he whispered. "And I want my father to stop believing he owns the ending." In the morning, I kissed Anna's forehead. "Happiest oranges in the world," I told her, and she grinned like it was a job only she could do. Nai giggled in our neighbor's arms, trusting the world the way children do. The tea shop smelled of jasmine. James stood beside me, shoulders tight, eyes steady. He walked in with me like a man who refused to be separated from his own life. James's mother sat near the back window, hands wrapped around her tea, as if she were holding herself together. When she saw him, her eyes filled instantly. When she saw me, she rose halfway, uncertain whether to run or reach. James took one slow step. "Mom," he said, voice trembling just enough to be true. That's when I noticed the man 2 tables away. A newspaper spread open too wide, a posture too calm, an expensive watch catching the light. He wasn't reading a single line. His eyes flicked up, fast, practiced, and landed on James. James's hand tightened around mine. Not panic, recognition. The man rose and lifted his phone with quiet certainty, as if this reunion belonged to someone else. "Mr. James," he murmured. "Folks, my heart is pounding. Before we see the rescue, please hit subscribe." The man's phone lifted from behind that too wide newspaper. "Mr. James," he said. James didn't loosen his grip on my hand. He shifted one quiet step so he stood between that man and his mother. "My name is James," he said, "and this meeting is not for you." The man's eyes slid over me. "Your father asked me to ensure that you control the room," I said softly. "But you don't get to own this moment." James's mother's fingers crushed the teacup. Her eyes begged the door. James leaned toward her, voice gentle. "Mom, look at me. You made it here. I'm proud of you." She swallowed hard. "He sent someone." "I expected it," James said. "That's why we chose a place with people." The man stepped closer. "Sir, if you would just take this call." James raised one finger. "Not today. Tell James's father my mother's voice comes first." That sentence did something to her. Her eyes filled, like her heart had been waiting for permission to exist out loud. I reached across the table. "I'm Diep," I said. "I'm not here to pull James away from you. I'm here so he doesn't have to do this alone." Her gaze held mine, shaking. "You're real." "I am," I said. "And you are too," the man exhaled, impatient. "Madam, your husband is expecting." At the word husband, she shrank. James's chair scraped back. "No," James said, clear enough that nearby heads turned. "You don't speak to her like she's property." A calm voice came from the counter. "Is there a problem?" Officer Thu stood there, steady. The man's confidence thinned. "This is a family matter," he tried. "In public," Officer Thu replied. "With witnesses. Keep it that way." "Macho." The man retreated to his table, phone still in hand. James turned back to his mother. "We don't have long," he said. "Tell me the truth." Her mouth trembled. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "I just learned what happens when I show it." James's eyes softened. "I always felt it." She stared into her tea. "He kept the house quiet," she said. "Quiet enough that you could hear your own thoughts and be afraid of them. If I defended you, he called it betrayal. If I disagreed, he called it disrespect. So I measured my breath. Tears spilled. "You grew up and left," she said, "and I stayed. I told myself staying was how I kept you safe." James blinked hard. "And I left because I thought leaving was how I kept you safe." Then James breathed in slow. "I have 2 little girls now," he said. "They still believe kindness is normal. I want to keep it that way. But I also want them to know what courage looks like." She glanced at me again, voice small. "Do they love you?" "They reach for me when they're scared," I said. "That's love." A fragile smile flickered across her face. "He reached too," she whispered, rubbing James's knuckles. "Even after he learned, people can pull away." "I'm still reaching," James said. Her shoulders tightened. He will punish me for being here. James held her eyes. Then we planned for that. But you don't go back believing today was a mistake. She opened her purse with shaking fingers and slid a worn cloth pouch across the table. I kept this, she whispered, because it was the only proof you still lived in that house. James opened it carefully. A tiny key, a yellowed paper folded small. He unfolded it, and his breath caught. A child's drawing, a fruit tree, a woman beneath it, a small boy holding her hand. Simple lines, loud love. I drew this, James whispered. You did, she said, after you hid under the table while he yelled. You came out with a crayon and said, "This is our door. We go here when it's loud." Her voice broke. I never walked through it. James stared at the paper. You still can, he said. Not because you owe me, because you deserve peace. Fear rose in her face. If I leave, he'll come for you. He's already circling, James said. But I'm not alone anymore. He glanced toward Officer Thu, then back to her. And neither are you. She reached for my hands, cold palms, fierce grip. Thank you, she whispered, for keeping him human. I squeezed her hands gently. He's human because you raised that part, I said. James's eyes flicked to the man with the phone. Time, he murmured. She nodded, devastated and grateful. 11 was all I could steal. Then we'll steal more, James said. In daylight, they stood. The man rose again, trying to step into their path. Your father will not appreciate. Tell him appreciation isn't required for boundaries, James said, and kept walking. Officer Thu stepped forward. Luan appeared by the door. The man moved aside. Outside, James's mother paused, shoulders tight. James hugged her, careful, firm. Call me tonight, he whispered. Even one word. She nodded against his shoulder. James, she breathed, like a prayer. She pulled back, looked at me once. Keep the light on, she whispered. But we will, I promised. She walked away without looking back. Back at Hill Fruits, Anna ran to us, waving her paper. Did my happiest oranges work? I kissed her forehead. They worked, I whispered. Nye climbed into James's arms and he held her close. That night, when the girls were asleep, we brought the wrapped painting to the table. James placed the child's drawing beside it, then unwrapped the painting slowly. The same tree, the same woman, the same boy's hand in hers, only now the colors were deep and alive. James swallowed. This is the door, he whispered. I slid my hand into his, and this time, I said, you don't walk through it alone. His voice aimed forward. Tomorrow I'll call her, he murmured. And the next day, until she believes she's allowed to be free. Outside, the road was quiet. Inside, our home held its light. And on that table, the door stayed open.